Hermit, The Mysterious Life of Jim Whyte by Jeffrey H. Ryan. Narrated by Gary Taylor. Chapter 1. Bird's Eye View. "I didn't set out to spy on him," Campbell said. "On most nights the light in his cabin went out an hour or so after dark. Wasn't unusual. Everyone got up with the sun and worked hard all day just to stay alive. From the looks of it, he was no different." He paused, took a sip of scotch, and continued looking toward the distant ridge, where the tops of the spruce trees were now barely distinct against the late evening sky. "Yep, if it weren't for that signal, I never would have learned what he was up to." He leaned back in his seat and put his feet up on the porch railing. Worn wood under his soles marked the hours he spent here. Evenings filled with light breezes through the pine boughs above, and views across the valley toward Jim Whyte's cabin. Strange weather that night. Hotter than hell. It didn't start that way. It was cool when I went to bed. I'd even shut the windows. But I woke up sweating. A hurricane down south was pumping hot air this way. I got up to open all the windows again. Then I walked out here onto the porch to see if it was any cooler. That's when I saw the whole thing. Campbell was still facing straight ahead in his chair. There was no table between us. The wide arms of the Adirondack chairs held our drinks instead, so we were only sitting a few feet apart. I glanced over at him because he'd stopped talking. His head was tossed back and his eyes were closed. The better to remember that night, I imagined. "First I heard the 1 a.m. Canadian Pacific train. Nothing strange about that. Happened every other night, still does. But as it moved through the low spot near Budfish Farm, I saw a light flash from Big Wilson Cliffs, right over there." He waved his nearly empty scotch glass out toward the ridge 2 miles away, and I wondered how his ice cube stayed on board. I gazed out that way, too. Nobody lived on Big Wilson Cliffs, but I knew where they were. Even in twilight I could see where the trees on the ridge ended and the bald granite cliffs began. I knew the signal was deliberate. 3 perfectly timed flashes. He was trying to make contact with someone on the train. But I was only able to see one side of the conversation, if you get my drift. I couldn't see the train. The woods were in the way. And even if I could have seen it, I would have been looking at the wrong side. If someone was trying to signal back, I sure wouldn't have seen it from here. I stood up and walked to the railing to see exactly what Campbell had seen more than a dozen years ago. Of course, he was right. There was nothing visible between his cabin and Big Wilson Cliffs except trees. Even by day you wouldn't be able to see the railroad tracks, and the roar of Big Wilson Stream was only ever carried here on the wind, if it was blowing from the northeast. "That night I sat out here looking over toward Big Wilson Cliffs," said Campbell. "But once the train was gone, there was nothing else to see. I don't think White even used the lantern to go back to his cabin. There was nothing but darkness. Of course, I knew he was up to something with somebody on that train. I decided to keep that to myself until I found out more."